to the tape.
Okay, yeah, so the Board of County Commissioners is reconvening at 12:31. Let the record reflect that all three commissioners are present for continued budget presentations, and Ms. Wallace. He's waving at me and saying we're good.
Ready? Okay.
He's ready too, so you're on.
Thank you, commissioners. And we're about ready to start our second afternoon of budget workshops. So like before, I'm just going to quickly cover some housekeeping items. We do have our budget coordinator, Tessa, who is going to help us keep time on these presentations. That is to ensure that everybody has an equal opportunity with you to discuss their issues and their budget for 2018. So green means that we are about 40 minutes into your 45 minutes. And then yellow, you've got a minute left. And then red means that your time is up. We are going to keep track if there are topics that we'd like to come back to the board and discuss. We're going to keep track of those. But we do want to at least keep this time focused on 2018 and the decisions that are going to be in front of the board to make regarding that budget. Front row is for presenters and staff. There's water, there's snacks to keep you full of energy out there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Bush, who's going to start us off this afternoon.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm Bonnie Bush. I'm the Juvenile Court Director. And hopefully Judge Price, who is my Superior Court Judge and my boss, should be showing up soon. So if he does, I'll try to stick him right there. And then I brought Teresa Stewart, my business manager that you all know, to help in case there's questions, that I can't answer down the road. So my presentation might look a little bit different from the previous presentations that I'm really going to be trying to share with you who the juvenile court staff serve and our reliance on our volunteers, our community partnerships, and other departments that we work with to do the work that we do. I think we're extremely unique because our whole focus at the juvenile court is to try to work with other state and city, county agencies to divert kids from coming deeper into our system. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our partnership later in my presentation. But like the other departments that have presented before, we have a no-frills budget, and the juvenile court is driven by statutes and state case management standards. So who are we and who do we serve? Start with our department mission statement. We serve our community by providing a system free of bias based on gender, race, ethnicity, and for other marginalized communities, and by promoting public safety, accountability, and positive change for delinquent, dependent, at-risk youth, children, and their families. We changed our department mission a couple of years ago because I do get money from the state. And the state wants to know more and more, what are we doing to look at bias within systems and really look at our racial and ethnic disparities? And so we've done a tremendous amount of work. We have a 5-year strategic plan that we've talked about what are we doing within our budgets and our expectations from the county and the state. But these are one of those areas that we really have to spotlight. Here's our org chart, like all the other departments are sharing. Our main services are dependency, which is birth to age 17. Our at-risk youth and truancy, those are our civil cases and they're non-offenders. We have diversion, which are our early offender cases that we try to divert and keep from being pulled again deeper into our system. So we utilize a lot of volunteers in those first 3 categories of working with our staff to get our work done. Probation that people are familiar with, and then also our detention, secure facility, and our alternatives that we have. A little look at our revenue and our resources. Approximately $6.5 million from the county, and the other $2.1 million are from the state and other grants that I might be applying for. We have 93 paid staff, and I've divided them between probation, detention, and administration. 67 of our staff are paid out of the general funds, and approximately 27 are non-general funds. And again, like I said earlier, we rely very, very heavily on our volunteer groups that we have. We could not function and get our work done without them. Here's our org chart, another way of looking at it, and I presented this to the judges before. As you see, anybody whose name is in black, it's county funding. The others, colors are our state funding that we have. And so part of the challenge that I had is when we were looking at county reductions, I can only stay within the black area. And then we also balance every year that we're looking at our state dollars that come in, we might be facing state cuts. And so when I do that, I only take from the state-funded positions, and we have to face those. Another look at what our services are, and I'm going to go into a little bit of detail in each one of those. Dependency, birth to 17. Dependency provides representation staff and advocacy for dependent children utilizing our staff guardian ad litems, or GALs, and 200+ court-appointed special advocates. We have over 1,000 cases in our system each year. Next is our at-risk youth and truancy. Our staff provides support and oversight for CHINS, which is Child in Need of Services, at-risk youth, or ARY, and our truancy petitions. Each of these petitions provides parents, schools, courts, and or law enforcement the ability better to monitor and engage youth and families. Last year, on the information I'm going to be sharing with you will probably be more close to our 2016 numbers, but we're staying steady in 2017. Last year, we had over 2,000 truancy petitions, 165 at-risk youth, and 83 CHINs. I thought it was important to put Rebecca Hedman's face on there because this is a young girl that was murdered in Spokane in 1993, and that's why we have the Becca Law, which is also our CHINs at risk and truancy law. And so back in that time when she was murdered here, the parents didn't have a whole lot of support when kids were run away. And she was placed over here for a drug alcohol program. She ran from it. She was murdered by John that had picked her up to prostitute her. And so then hence came the Becca Bill. The struggles that I've had since coming back as a director for now 15 years is every year there's been a different group of people that have tried to eliminate the Becca Bill. And we've done a tremendous amount of work here, my staff and myself, on really being the pit bulls around Becca and supporting it, and done a tremendous amount of work with our school partners that we have, I'll talk about later. But what that was designed to do is to try to give teeth within the court system and help support the parents. So when a kid is on the run, what can you do? Right now, there's going to be some legislative proposals or changes of removing the use of secure detention for any of these youth. And so those will be things that we'll have to juggle, and we'll keep you informed on and what will happen with that. Diversion. Diversion handles low-level first-time offenders by meeting with and assigning conditions to referred youth as an alternative to the formal court process. Our staff monitor the performance of youth and provides or refers youth to services and responds with action where needed. We provide screening, training, supervision, and assign cases in direction to our Neighborhood Accountability Board members, which there's some pictures of those. And we have over 1,000 cases a year with our diversion cases. We have 3 different boards that are set up within the county of Spokane. Okay. Probation and court investigation. Probation that you're more familiar with, supervisors are low to high risk offenders. We conduct risk assessments and develop case plans which address public safety, offender accountability, and rehabilitation. We utilize evidence-based programming and practices to decrease youth risk factors and increase protective factors. We conduct social investigations. We assess the level of risk to the community, and we present detention and sentencing recommendations to the Superior Court judge and court commissioners assigned to the juvenile court. This is a picture of Chris Chittum. He's one of my probation counselors, and he's on bike patrol. So what we do is part of our community partnership that if we see a need and if we could figure out a way within our existing resources to be creative, then we'll do it. So he's partnered with law enforcement, Mark Richards, and the Business Association downtown, so that if we start seeing more crime and activity with groups of kids, we will be down there. We'll be, we as in Chris, because I've not done this, so I'm not talking the collective we. Chris will be down there with some of our other staff going between the alleys, going under the bridge, going everywhere to find these kids, because they will find housing wherever they can, because they are run away from home, and we want them off the street, and we want them to have services. Detention alternative programming is DAP. And part of our programs is primarily skill development for all of our youth. And so I've been working on reform efforts since I came back in 2004 as the director of the juvenile court. And part of that, again, as I said earlier in the introduction, we try to do a lot of work that really diverts kids from being pulled deeper into our system. And we're trying to impact the school-to-prison pipeline. We're trying to stop graduation from the juvenile court process into the adult system. And statewide, that you may or may not be familiar with the Juvenile Courts Association, working really closely with Washington State Center for Court Research and the Institute for Public Policy, that's where the development of over 20 years ago, we have our risk assessment and our evidence-based programs that I can tell you has been really effective because we've shut down over 50% of the state institutions, let alone I've been able to bring reform efforts here to Spokane, where we've reduced our detention population by 50%. And then when I did that, I moved some of my staff and created community oversight and created the detention alternative programs with existing resources. Some of them have dwindled over the years. I've talked earlier of previous state cuts or county cuts have shrunk, but I'm still trying to hang on and maintain those. But so we've been able to develop early on, quite a few years ago, we had electronic monitoring. That was my master's level thesis that I worked on when I was earlier working at the court, and we were one of the first in the nation to have an electronic monitoring program for juveniles, and we provide that for pre and post adjudicated, as well as we have a special program for school monitoring only, of trying to make sure that those kids, as part of the Becca bill, we don't pull them in detention, but we're still monitoring them more closely to say you need to be in school, that's where your future is, and this we want to keep you there and have you graduate. So we also provide community service. We have day reporting school. It's at the basement of our human resource building. And those are kids that might be on probation or they might be truant youth that were disengaged from school. And we're saying we value school so much. We're going to bring you into our SAC. It's Structured Alternative Confinement School. We've got to get a new name for that. But it's our day reporting school program funded and staffed by ESD. And we have 3 classrooms, 2 are for offender population and 1 is just for the truant population. Short term, try to get them reconnected to their home school district and then figure out, why it is that they had disengaged or dropped out or just maybe there had been a long-term suspension because of having a weapon at school might be a reason why they couldn't go back to school. If they're partnered with us or if a kid is on probation, then we will make sure that they are attending school in our day reporting school program. These are just some of the examples. We have a boys group that we just started, and Terry is one of my staff in this lower right picture in the green shirt. He provides community service and monitoring the kids, but he also works on mechanical stuff and fixing lawnmowers and things like that so that he can work with the kids and then talk about some of the issues that are keeping them from attending school or getting them into trouble. So it's like creating the relationships that we know that are really important to be effective in what we do. The far end of our programming. Secure detention, electronic monitoring. So on the far right is just a picture of electronic monitoring, and I've already talked a little bit about that. On the far left is our nurse manager. And what I want to say is I know that the jail has a certified mental health program in the jail, so do we. And so Deborah Hanna is the staff person that we have and works very closely with our nurse manager, Denise Sullivan, and we also have some funds that we get through the BHO right now to fund Deborah, and I know that's going to be something down the road I'll have to remind myself and make sure that that position is protected, but we also have a certified program. We know that working with these kids, there's an awful lot of trauma that has been in their lifetime, and so the kids at the front end of dependency, you could have kids be impacted in a foster home and care for a number of years. They could graduate to the Becca, population, which could be now they're skipping school, and then they come over to the offender end of it. So we've learned that the earlier that we can get prevention or early intervention in with these kids and address resiliency to the trauma that they've suffered, the better that we can do the work that we are. So it's really important that I maintain the level of service that we provide in detention. It isn't just locking them up. And so we're required, because we're different, to have those kids that we have in detention out of their cells for the bulk of the day that we're dealing with them. They can only be in their cells while they're sleeping at night. We're required. We're also PREA certified. I believe we were the first detention center to go through. It was a laborious project. It took us a year and a half to get prepared through our policies and procedures, but PREA is Prison Rape Elimination Act, and there are our policy procedures now this thick of making sure that we covered all of our bases, not using isolation cells and keeping those kids out and dealing with trauma, building resiliency while holding them accountable. And so it's that balancing act of understanding that there's accountability to the actions that they have taken, but what do we need to do because they're also children that we're dealing with. We have, even with all of our diversion opportunities, we have had this last year a child as young as 8 be brought to our detention center. We did not detain that child, but that child is what I'm going to refer to is the starting of baby gang. And so the 13-year-olds will go to the 8 and 9-year-olds and say, you're not going to get as much trouble as I will, so you're going to go rob that person for me. We're seeing some of those things that are happening now, just a little strange that we're working on that at that young of age. But we have been able, through our reform efforts, to, like I said earlier, to reduce our population. The kids that end up in our detention center are our highest needs, highest risk youth. Okay? Reform efforts. When I came back to the juvenile court as a director in 2004, I immediately started different reform efforts, and I talked briefly about those. And the first one was through the Annie Casey Foundation, our Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative. This is really similar to what Dr. Van Wormer and SRLJC are working on in the adult system. So this is the process that I used to get where we're at in seeing some of the reductions in recidivism and the work that we've been able to do to not just focus on the use of secure detention, but what you can do effectively by using alternatives. From that, when we started in 2004, and I have to say I'm very proud of this, we didn't come back to the county or the state, and we received no extra money. So again, it was the challenge of what can you do with existing resources that we were able to do this. I then was tapped by Justice Bridge and with the MacArthur Foundation of going, okay, well, you're doing this on the offender end of it. What can you do more on the front end of your system, which is back to our BECA kids? So we really started working, collaborating with our school districts and looking at what can be done to really keep kids in school, because Spokane at that time, if you remember, there were billboards talking about the high number of dropouts, from the school districts, and what are we going to do about it? What we did is we studied West Valley School District because they had a truancy board. We were able to prove that that was an effective and is now a promising practice on how you can work with kids and their families to keep them engaged at school. And then we were able to have replication sites all through Spokane, and then it recently has become 2017 legislation requiring that all schools partner with juvenile courts, to have community truancy boards. Well, we didn't get any extra money from the state, I need to let you know that, and so that will potentially be a challenge because the schools are going to say they don't have extra resources for it. But because Spokane did it without extra resources, I think the expectation is the rest of the state can, and I'm going to tell you that will be a challenge for folks. But we did get recognition from Tavis Smiley, and we ended up being on a PBS publication of Education Under Arrest because of the programming that we did in really trying to break the school to prison pipeline, which led us into, in 2013, being recognized as a pocket of excellence in the Blueprint Report. And part of that of our work is because of what you just talked about of working with the Annie Casey Foundation and also through the MacArthur Foundation. And we're continuing this work. It just doesn't start and stop. This becomes part of who we are in our strategic planning. Then I was asked, because I worked with MacArthur and with Annie Casey, to go to Georgetown University and take a small group of partners, and so that we would become certified in a school partnership and court partnership. But I also took a law enforcement rep with me, school district representatives, myself, and that we're really looking at achieving a reduction in disparities experienced by marginalized youth. And those include youth of color, students with special needs, foster youth, LGBTQI+, and students who have contact with all of our systems up here. Again, trying to keep those kids from being pulled deeper. What we found, because we looked at our data and we found that yes, bias does exist within our system, partnering with the school district, they see the same thing. So what we're really looking at is how do we stop that so that kids and parents feel accepted and can stay engaged in what it is that we do. Before I get to cuts, I have to call out Jim Amacio. Thank you, Jim, in a positive way. So Jim's been working with me just most recently because I have a partnership with Lutheran Family Services dealing with sexually exploited youth within our community. And so we're piloting, I think this is the first in the state of Washington, seeing if we can get housing set up for kids that we've identified from bike patrol or from Crosswalk that's downtown dealing with the homeless youth, that if they are engaged, being prostituted, sexually exploited, that we have housing. I have a small pot of money from a grant that I wrote, and so the main thing is if we can get this up and running with St. Margaret's, it would be, again, piloting and showing the way for the rest of the state, that if you can get this and get the funding in there, maybe we can get these kids off the street temporarily in a safe housing. So thank you, Jim, and he's our legal, so I have to rely on him, and so he does a lot for us in our county, and so sometimes he has to come over and work with me, which is not always pleasant to do, but I appreciate what work and advice he's giving us. So then we're down to our cut. So we were asked to look at a little over $100,000. So that comes back to that one slide where you saw where my staff were, my org chart with the people that were in black, and then we had our state funding. So I was really limited on where I could take the cuts. And then I looked at my detention, and what I need to call out about my detention staff is that we are at minimum staffing. And again, we have standards that we have to comply with, and you have to have a certain number of staff per ratio of kids that are back in detention because you're dealing still with children. They might have done something that was really heinous, but we're still dealing with children and their mental health needs. And so, and the fact that we're required to keep them out of their cells for the bulk of the day that they're up and programming them. So I can't eliminate anybody in secure detention. I will not eliminate my mental health, professional or my nursing staff that I have. And so we looked at, where could we take cuts? And so I had to turn to the other side, which is going to be my probation area. So we were looking at eliminating 2 office assistant positions. And one of them that we're going to do is we have some user fees that we could put behind that, and at least we would have and generate enough for an extra year. I don't know what we do for the year after that, but once that funding is depleted, then I would be actually losing 2 positions. We're looking at, then we would have to eliminate a diversion probation counselor, and those were the folks that work with our 60 volunteers in those neighborhood accountability board meetings that help provide with the training and support that they need. Then we looked at, we would probably have to eliminate a probation unit supervisor. We're going to have a retirement in the early spring, and so we thought, well, maybe this is one way of meeting the demands of the budget reduction. But what that person does is that, Tom Davis is the person that's in the position right now. He's part of the quality assurance. And so when you have all of these reform efforts that are going on and the programs and the risk assessments that you have to do, you have to have quality assurance built in so you're not drifting from the program that has been approved. So, so you don't want to have that because then you're not running it the way that it was designed to run. So that would be a huge impact on our staff, youth, and programming if I were to lose that position. Then the only other place that we could look at eliminating, which I would not recommend, but we were forced to because I couldn't cut deeper in detention, would be eliminating 50% of the electronic monitoring program. That put us in a catch-22 because that means if the judge and if my staff can't use that as an alternative, then those kids would still be in detention, and I'm at minimum staffing already, so then that would, force me to come back and say I need additional staff just to monitor these kids. And so, but we're kind of at that crossroad of saying I have really nowhere else to cut. And so I can't tell you that my recommendations are the best in the world, but they're the only ones that I have for right now for reductions. Anything else? For the next year, well, if looking at these cuts, we'll have to figure out how to make them work. I also have, and I know we're not supposed to share any additional documents with you, but if you wanted to know, I have an 18-page strategic plan that I have to share with the judges of what we're working on, but those are the main categories that we will continue looking at over the next 5 years. Have any questions?
Questions for Ms. Bush?
What percentage of your staff is managerial or supervisory?
So I think we've got, if I'm going to break it down for managerial, I've got 4 of us who are not in the union. So that's myself, Teresa, my detention manager, and my probation manager. Then I have supervisors, lead workers, so I might have shift supervisors, but I don't consider them managerial. I consider the 4 of us the primary managers, but I have a systems manager that does all the data entry as well, so I would say 5. So percentage-wise, what would you say? Yeah.
And I just asked, that was, your grid was, was confusing, so I
Well, and I have layers of supervisors, but some of the work is required. Let me talk about the state. So the state gives us dollars, and I have to provide an annual report back to the state of how I use every single penny. And they have guidelines. Well, within these dollars that you might get for probation, you can have X amount of probation staff because of the state standards of case management. And in that, maybe you could work in a unit supervisor or a supervisor. And in that, then you might be able to get a clerical. So they're really detailed as to how I can use those dollars, and then I have to report back to them. You know, and so that's how, you know, you're going to see that there are layers, because there's expectations with the work that comes with those supervisors of having that oversight on those programs that we do.
So, for the benefit of my fellow commissioners, we've been engaged in a process with our wonderful facility out at Medical Lake called Martin Hall.
Yeah.
And we've been back and forth with them with regard to trying to persuade our fellow commissioners in the other counties to maybe transport their youth to our facility as opposed to continuing to send them to Martin Hall. And so Ms. Bush and her staff have been incredible in terms of supporting some kind of transition that we would hope to be able to implement, assuming at some point we can get the commissioners to see the wisdom of pursuing a business model different than Martin Hall. My opinion, I think others share it, but I won't impose it on others, but my opinion is that Martin Hall is a failed business model, and it is not the best we could do for our youth. And what Ms. Bush and her staff have put together in terms of a program to deal with the juveniles is absolutely outstanding. And I just want to compliment you for your leadership and the dedication of your staff. And at some point, I remain hopeful that our fellow commissioners will see the wisdom of sending their kids here. You're running, I believe, at about half capacity for the detention facility, and have been for many, many years.
Yes.
And so we have the capacity to take on additional youth, which would bring in additional revenue. Our goal is not to chase the revenue. Our goal is to provide a better environment for our youth. With that comes additional revenue, but that's a sideline. And so the cost that you have offered to the facility is a fraction of what the counties are currently paying and stuff. So I remain hopeful. Douglas County is now in the process of waging a legal battle with Martin Hall to see if there's a way to where we can hopefully influence a different outcome with that facility. I know that my fellow commissioners are kind of new to this battle, but it has been long-standing. One of the things that one of the commissioners for a county south of us has asserted is that our cost per juvenile detained is higher than the cost of Martin Hall. And his math is very rudimentary and tries to compare apples and oranges, and refuses to compare apples and apples because they would have to up their game to get anywhere close to what we do, and don't provide anywhere close to the level of services that you provide. So it's a false number, and so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to share this for the record from my fellow commissioners, is that don't be deceived into believing that the numbers that are put forward are apples and apples, because Martin Hall doesn't come anywhere close to the caliber of program that Ms. Bush and her staff provides for this community and stuff. So kudos to you and your staff.
And thank you for your
excellent
support.
job.
Yeah.
You do an excellent job.
Thank you.
Yep. So we're